In Iraq, Shiite-led militia forces say they've launched an operation to retake a small village held by Islamic State militants west of Mosul, pushing the insurgents further towards the Syrian border. It's part of that painstaking operation to retake Iraq's second city, an operation launched in October with parts east of the Tigris River liberated in January. France 24's Roméo Langlois and Matthieu Mabin are just back from Mosul, where they witnessed the fighting firsthand and how French and U.S. forces are being very careful when it comes to artillery strikes. Careful because of all the civilians trapped in ISIS-held parts.
It's happened before that we've been told to cancel a strike mission. I remember one time when the risk wasn't so much civilian casualties, but rather infrastructure. In this particular case, near the target, there were high-voltage power lines that we wanted to avoid hitting, because after the war, there will be peace. And we need to safeguard these key infrastructures to prepare the country for peacetime.
Well, for more, we're joined by Matthieu Mabin, who's just back from Mosul. Matthieu, you were there back in March. Before I ask you about the difference between then and now, those images that we saw, the French army, the U.S. army, keen to have reporters see the fact that they're playing it very cautious.
Yes, for the very first time we were welcomed by some US Army officers who agreed to speak face to our cameras because they were involved in some civilian casualties. There is a doubt about it, of course. But, you know, the battle for Mosul is very special because it happens, it takes place in some builded area with a massive presence of civilian people. It is the first time in Iraq we witness that kind of battle. The battle for Fallujah was very different. Most of the civilian population was allowed to run away, to flee before the fight between ISIS and the Iraqi army. This is the main difference.
It is here that they've encircled
yes,
the whole of the city.
Yes, but they allowed a back door to let the civilian run away. And through the same back door, ISIS finally left the city and didn't really fight. But in Mosul, the battle is very different. ISIS is facing Iraqi army, Iraqi security forces since the beginning of the battle in October. It is a very long battle, and in the field you find families everywhere. In each house, in each building, there is sometimes dozens of people living there since the very beginning of the battle, and those civilians are stuck into crossfire between ISIS and Iraqi army.
Now, the last time you went to Mosul was 7 weeks ago.
Yes.
What's the difference?
The difference is that 7 weeks is very long when people are beginning to starve, when the water has disappeared, when there is probably nothing left to eat for the families. There is probably some reserve, but of course this food is taken by ISIS fighters first. Those civilian people are also very often used as human shield. We had a doubt at the very beginning of the battle in October and November. It's also a war of communication. So we had to check, to go in the field and to make sure it was not just not a guideline of communication of Iraqi army. Now we know that the civilian population is used as human shield. We witnessed it with our own eyes.
Has the front line moved much in those 7 weeks?
Yes, yes, really. And the cost was very heavy. Iraqi forces have lost a lot of men. Once again, it is very difficult to know how many. Probably 20, 25, 30% of the soldiers were killed or wounded in action, which is absolutely huge. We have never seen this since the last World War. So it is definitely a very serious and violent battle. The last point we have to check is how many civilian people have lost their life during the battle. Nobody can tell it, really. Even some very serious international organizations, even the UN, don't give any number. Probably hundreds, maybe thousands.
You mentioned at the outset, Matthieu Mabin, how part of it is a public relations effort. The U.S. and the French showing that they're trying to limit as much as possible the civilian casualties. It's also a public relations effort for the Iraqi army, which was accused of letting militias basically carry out executions, summary executions after the retaking of cities like Fallujah, like Tikrit. In the case of Mosul, are they doing better?
Once again, it is very difficult to say. There is a battle between Shia and Sunni in Iraq since years. The battle for Mosul is a battle between Shia and Sunni. The population inside Mosul is 100% Sunni. The Iraqi forces, the Iraqi security forces are almost 100% Shia. The ones who are involved in the battle for Mosul. Of course, we do remember that Iraq was hit by war since the last 15 years, and before that again. This confrontation between Shia and Sunni is not going to end. One of the big issues of the battle for Mosul is how the Iraqi government is going to make possible the fact that Sunni and Shia live together after the battle, after ISIS disappear.
Are they doing better? Are they doing better in terms of, mixing those popular mobilization forces, those Shia militias, with others that are Kurdish or Sunni?
Shia militias are now mostly under control of Iraqi army, which is huge progress, really. It was a condition before the Iraqi army launched the operation on Mosul in October. They would not have launched this operation if they were not sure the Shia militia were mostly under control. So, of course, there were some crimes, really, we are sure about it, but not massive crimes, not yet. But once again, it's one of the biggest issues of the battle, to reach the end of the battle without any massive massacre. If the Shia militia were leading the battle, the situation would be much worse.
All right, and you can see that report in full a little bit later on in some 90 minutes' time here on France 24. Matthieu Mabin, many thanks for that update. Meanwhile, in neighboring Syria, after the taking of Tabqa, Kurdish forces on the ground say they need the U.S. armament that's been promised. As they say, the push to retake the Islamic State stronghold of Raqqa won't happen before early summer at the earliest. Rudaba Abbas has more.
Emboldened by their victory by capturing Tabqa, Kurdish fighters have received heavy weapons from the US military. The strategic town was retaken from the Islamic State group on Wednesday. The fighters say they will now push on and launch an offensive on the self-proclaimed Caliphate's Syrian stronghold in Raqqa. The city was one of the first to fall to the extremist militants in January 2014. It has been targeted with airstrikes by the Syrian government, Russia, the United States, as well as France.
The liberation of al-Raqqa will be at the hands of the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the good news will be announced once we reach the heart of the city. I think the offensive should begin by the start of the summer.
The recapture of Tabqa edges Kurds closer to the Syrian heartland of the Islamic State group's so-called Caliphate in Raqqa, which lies just 55 kilometers down the Euphrates Valley. Kurdish fighters also captured the country's largest dam, which is located close by, a crucial prize in the strategy for retaking the city.
We thank the international coalition forces that largely contributed in liberating Tabqa city by land and by air. We're informing our public that the administration of the city will be handed over to a civil council.
The victory is being viewed as a diplomatic snub to Turkey, which opposes the involvement of Kurdish fighters in Syria. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has offered his own troops to retake Raqqa instead.
And finally, how do you move a 650-year-old mausoleum? The answer? Well, very carefully. This is what happened earlier in the Turkish Akuyunlu state. This is the first example of the tradition of mausoleums in Anatolia. It's situated in the east of the Turkish province of Batman. And there it was the tomb for Zenel Bey, the son of the ruler of Akuyunlu state, which has to be moved. The reason for the elaborate relocation, the tomb threatened to be overflown by the waters of the nearby Ilisu Dam.